On October 30th, 2020, the Kilkenny-based Irish animation studio Cartoon Saloon released their new feature film, Wolfwalkers, to a glowing reception from both critics and audiences. It's the third film in what the studio has loosely described as a Celtic trilogy, the two previous instalments being their 2009 film The Secret of Kells and their 2015 film Song of the Sea. Each film in the trilogy takes its inspiration from Ireland's history, folktales and mythology, and is imbued with magic and mystery through the use of an art style with its origins in Celtic insular art, but one that is unique to Cartoon Saloon. The three films take place in three distinct time periods in the Irish national consciousness. That of insular art and Viking invasion in The Secret of Kells, that of Cromwell and colonial plantations in Wolfwalkers, and that of a more contemporary Ireland in Song of the Sea. By engaging directly with Ireland's history, Cartoon Saloon's feature films provide a rich source of contemporary perspectives on the socio-political concerns of Irish cinema, while the studio's clear influences from folk traditions, mythology, and Celtic insular art invite a reopening of discussions around identity, nationalism, and commodification. In this essay, I will investigate these concerns and discussions by contextualising Cartoon Saloon, situating the studio in Ireland's cinematic, economic, cultural, and socio-political history. I will begin by establishing the context of the animation industry and its history in Ireland. Ireland's animation origins date to around 1909, even before the arrival of the Lumiere brothers cinematographers in 1910, which marked the beginnings of an Irish cinema. The Horgan brothers, photographers and newsreel filmmakers from Youghal, County Cork, used model making and stop-motion techniques to create early experimental animation footage. An animator by the name of Steve Woods brought the film to the 2002 Galway Film Festival's Irish Animation Retrospective, and he suggests that the film might be as early as 1907, which would make it one of the earliest pieces of animation on film ever produced. The film is similar in kind to its contemporaries, such as Blackton's The Haunted Hotel in 1907. Few of these early animations were concerned with narrative, but rather the realisation of movement was seen as an entertainment in its own right. The Horgan brothers' film is perhaps better described as a moment of experimentation, indulging in the delight of disrupting footage of a static Youghal main street. Despite this promising beginning for Irish animation, the country was experiencing a period of social and political upheaval. With the Easter Rising in 1916, followed by political executions and the Government of Ireland Act in 1920, the economic climate was simply incompatible with the development of a new arts industry such as animation. There wouldn't be another notable moment for animation until the 1940s, when Lotte Reiniger, a German animator working in Ireland, created a series of classical fairy tales in Irish, including Cottenham Rogue or Puss in Boots, with the assistance of the National Film Institute, now Bord Scanán. Attitudes slowly changed, and film began to be seen as a valuable form of cultural production in the early 60s. With the inauguration of the national broadcaster RTE, there was finally a domestic outlet for Irish filmmakers and animators. A commercially viable animation industry was on the horizon, and animators such as Gunther Wolff and Roisin O'Shea began receiving commissions for short animated adverts. One major limitation on the industry at this time, however, was the lack of animation training available in Ireland. This ultimately resulted in the animators who were here moving elsewhere for education and work, ultimately a very small part of a much larger pattern of emigration during the 70s and 80s. One such animator who moved elsewhere for training returned, in the hopes of developing an Indigenous animation practice, despite the lack of resources for large-scale studio productions. Aidan Hickey, a former teacher at the National College of Art, worked with RTE to produce a 16-part series of animated shorts in 1978, and later created the 1987 film An Inside Job. Hickey's preferred mode of animation was with hand-cut paper, as opposed to the orthodox, hand-drawn and cel-traced aesthetic that signified the commercial cartoon of this period. In An Inside Job, the narrator/villain recounts a fictional Hollywood film while masquerading as a dentist, playing each role himself while he steals all of the open mouth's gold fillings. The animated form here plays an interesting role, facilitating contact between the Irish oral tradition of storytelling and Hollywood cinema. The strength of the film is its dialogue, perhaps by necessity due to the limitations of Hickey's preferred cutout method. Hallis and Manvell suggest that relatability in animation happens primarily through bodily movement and a recognition of the physicality of being. While it is a quality of cutout animation that both character and background can be rendered in a single style, the movement of cutout figures, being more akin to flat-hinged puppets, does not allow for the squash and stretch principles of hand-drawn animation, so achieving a convincing sense of weight, volume and three-dimensional space becomes more difficult. The use of literary voiceover in Irish film has been noted elsewhere by archivist George Morrison, who described the practice as illustrated radio. In An Inside Job, the act of storytelling takes centre stage. It is, however, cross-pollinated, or perhaps even infected, by the dominant American cinematic culture. Ireland's storytelling culture goes well beyond that of entertainment. The oral tradition has existed since pre-Celtic and pre-feudal times, as a means of keeping laws, histories and folk tales which were committed to memory by druids and bards. While ancient traditions may seem so distant that they ought to be irrelevant, the absence of a distinctly Irish visual culture beyond that of Celtic insular art to draw from is notable. This absence is accounted for by Jan Sheehy in her examination of Celtic revivals. The native Irish possessed great gifts in architecture and applied art, from the 8th century until the 12th, and these survived well into the ensuing period of invasion and conquest. Succeeding centuries of war and hardship gradually wiped them out. The visual arts need leisure, stability, and above all money to flourish and survive. Music, on the other hand, and literature can be passed on orally even in times of change and instability. Thus, the literary talents of the Celt were sustained and developed, used to maintain his cultural identity, while his capacity to produce tangible and visible works of art atrophied for lack of use. This presence of literature and music in the expression of national and cultural identity appears again in animation in Timothy Booth's short film The Prisoner. The film is an alternative imagining of W.B. Yeats' poem The Lake Isle of Innisfree, in which the juxtaposition of idyllic rural life and grey urban existence is explored, distorted, and used to criticise Ireland's increasing modernity. The juxtaposition exists also in the form. Yeats' romantic 19th century literary voiceover plays out over an animated aesthetic inspired by comic book art, its style akin to that of Thin Lizzy's album artist and Celtic illustrator Jim Fitzpatrick. The image of Thin Lizzy's Phil Lynott is used here as a symbol of Irish creative liberation, while the band's guitarist Gary Moore performs the background music of The Prisoner. Booth's depiction of the Isle's huts undergoing rapid modernisation after the arrival of people, built by hands wearing Mickey Mouse gloves, suggests the hands of corporate America are restructuring Ireland, as well as the animated form itself. Booth is economical in this film, with each consecutive image full of drama and emotion, offering commentary on a wide range of socio-political and cultural subjects, from environmentalism to colonialism, capitalism, and religious militarism. Booth's surreal film carries the torch of experimental Irish animation while offering critical perspectives on Irish life. The Irish animation industry of the late 1980s and early 90s was dominated by the presence of a large American studio working from Dublin, that of ex-Disney animation director Don Bluth. The impact of the Sullivan Bluth studio was a far-reaching catalyst. With their big-budget, family-friendly Hollywood fanfare, Irish animators were put under a heightened pressure to conform to a commercial American form. However, Don Bluth, while in Ireland, established the country's first animation course at Ballyfermot College in Dublin, now the Irish School of Animation. Irish animation, beyond that of Bluth's American studio, has gone largely unrecognised in the discourses of Irish cinema. Martin McLuhan, when discussing animation, stated that a short-lived but vibrant animation industry flourished between 1987 and 1992, leaving all prior Indigenous Irish animation out of the canonical discourses of Irish film, and giving credence to the perception of the American hand-drawn style as the consummate form of animation practice. As this prolific period of American animation production in Ireland ended in the mid-90s, and as the new animation training programs began to produce world-class animators and filmmakers, intermittent attempts were made to revive Irish feature-length animation production. This would prove difficult, however, and many Irish animators began working on short films instead. 2002 was a particularly memorable year for Irish animated shorts, with 2 nominated in the animated short film category at the Academy Awards, namely 50% Grey, directed by Rory Robinson, and Give Up Your All Sins by Peg Cunningham. Robinson would later go on to direct Leonardo DiCaprio's adaptation of the anime Akira, and Give Up Your All Sins was expanded into a DVD anthology and has remained a clear moment in the national consciousness. With this renewed interest in Irish animation, both domestically and abroad, the potential for an animated feature film industry was becoming greater. Galway-based Magma Films, an independent production company, produced a number of feature-length animated films with European partners. One such collaboration is their 2008 film Nico and the Way to the Stars, a family film that follows a young reindeer searching for his father. The animated graphics made use of CGI, allowing it to compete with big-budget studios such as DreamWorks and Pixar, but high-quality computer animation comes at a cost, and that cost was its commercial viability. With a budget goal of €6 million needed, it had to be a commercial-grade, orthodox, family-friendly children's film. Quinn and Rocket noted that in the 90s, despite an increase in technical proficiency, there seems to have been an unquestioning embrace of commercial Hollywood forms in Irish cinema. Similar concerns were raised by Hickey regarding animation in the Bluth period and the following years, prompting the question, is it possible to animate a traditional hand-drawn film in Ireland that maintains a national interest and succeeds at the box office? A year after the release of Nico and the Way to the Stars, a new animated feature film in 2009 seemed to answer that very question with a resounding yes. The Secret of Kells, the first feature-length production from Kilkenny studio Cartoon Saloon, seemed to have anticipated all of these concerns. While the film is a co-production with Les Armatures in France and Vivi Film in Belgium, the majority of the animation took place in the Kilkenny studio, with 35 animators at the peak of production. The Secret of Kells' national interest extends well beyond the nationality of its animators, however. Taking its inspiration from the eponymous Book of Kells, the film tells the story of Irish monks safeguarding the fading art form of illumination from Viking invaders. This could also be seen as a metaphor for the fight for survival of experimental and hand-drawn animation in an increasingly homogeneous global market. The film juxtaposes the main character Brendan and his uncle's monastery with the magic and wildness of the forest, given form by the fairy girl Aisling. The spirals, triskells and lozenges of The Secret of Kells echo the insular Celtic style, which avoids unfavourable comparisons with overseas ventures. The studio's following film, Song of the Sea, was released in 2015 to another positive reception of nominations and awards. It tells the story of a boy, Ben, and his sister Saoirse, and their father who live in a lighthouse off the coast of Donegal. We discover that Saoirse is a Selkie, a mythical creature from Irish folklore, a fairy who can transform into a seal with her magic coat. It is the Selkie's duty to free the other fairy folk, the Dina Shi, from the goddess Macha. The film is enchanting and shows clear growth from the studio's previous venture, with a more cohesive screenplay and a more developed, intricate watercolour art style. This film also captures what McLuhan would describe as the in-betweenness of Irish identity. Our protagonist's journey from the west of Ireland to Dublin describes the duality of Irish life, of rural isolated living with the bustling greyness of the city which threatens to destroy the nature and magic of Ireland. Lastly, Cartoon Saloon's most recent film, Wolfwalkers, looks at the midpoint between the time periods depicted in The Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea. Set in the 1600s in Kilkenny, during the Cromwellian plantations, Wolfwalkers tells the story of an English girl, Robin, her father, and her new friend Maeve, who is a wolf walker. A girl when she's awake and a wolf while she's asleep. The art style here, while still recognisable, makes a slight departure from the studio's previous ventures, with more sketchy lines reminiscent of Isao Takahata's final film, The Tale of Princess Kaguya. Cartoon Saloon's dedication to experimental animation forms is admirable and is a good reminder of Ireland's overlooked avant-garde history with the medium. Wolfwalkers director Tom Moore discussed the choice of 2D animation in an interview, citing its near unlimited potentials. 2D animation can really use the whole language of visual art, all the way from absolute abstraction to fully figurative. Wolfwalker's story also does not shy away from depicting the British colonial power of Cromwell, but neither does it demonise the English. The film takes pride in its Irish heritage, but also stays well away from exclusionary generalisations about Irish identity. The magical wolfwalkers eventually even invite Robin and her father to join them in their wild, forest-dwelling life. Cartoon Saloon's feature films, and more specifically their Celtic trilogy, have proven to be three of the most well-received films by both critics and audiences to come from Ireland in the last decade. Not only have they established themselves as a commercially viable practice, being cited in a 2007 report by the Irish Film Board as a key practitioner in the industry, but they have done so with no sacrifice to their style or narratives. Cartoon Saloon, along with other Indigenous animation practices around the world, have exemplified a means of resistance to capitalist, commercial, and American forms of animation. The studio's depictions of Irish identities do not just reiterate stereotypical depictions of the past. Rather, they elaborate on them, providing historical and cultural context through fantastical fiction. The trope of a fragmented or in-between Irish identity is pacified in their films. While a duality exists between rural and modern, the west of Ireland and Dublin, the Irish and the foreign, it is expressed but does not feel fragmented. Rather, it feels closer to the inherent heterogeny of life everywhere, including in Ireland. Through this, they avoid the pitfalls of the many forms of Irish nationalism, and instead can work towards their goal of preserving the ancient storytelling culture of Ireland, beyond that of just illustrated radio.